Thank you for the opportunity to talk about Education 4.0 and to use this platform as an opportunity to rethink higher education. My name is Dr. Megan Bola. I'm the Chief Institutional Culture Innovation and Assessment Officer at Fulbright University, Vietnam. And rethinking higher education is really what we do every single day. I'm hoping that we can explore questions around what we mean when we say rethink higher education, and really the fundamental reason why it behooves us as faculty to do such a thing. What do we mean when we say Education 4.0? Education 4.0 is an idea that's riding on the back of Industry 4.0. And the argument is that there have been 3 previous industrial revolutions: steam, mass manufacturing, automation, and that we are in the throes of the 4th industrial revolution, and that each of these industrial revolutions have changed the way that we process information and the skills that are needed for job seekers in the communities. Industry 4.0 is driven by the confluence and convergency of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, big data, and cloud computing. Education 4.0 is a movement that's trying to figure out what skills our students need to succeed during this 4th industrial revolution. I'm a comparative psychologist. I study chimpanzees and preschoolers, and I have degrees in classics and women's studies. But I'm involved profoundly in these questions because I am at heart a teacher and a pioneer of new universities. My first startup university was in Canada a decade ago at Quest University, Canada, which is an innovative liberal arts and sciences university using inquiry-based learning, student ownership of education, a block plan where students take 1 course at a time and faculty teach 1 course at a time, where experiential learning activities were embedded in the curriculum, capstone projects were required of all students, and students lived 100% residential with a cohort model. I'm currently Chief Institutional Culture Innovation and Assessment Officer at another innovative educational experiment, Fulbright University, Vietnam. And this is a position where I'm responsible for shaping the culture, for ensuring that we keep innovation at the heart of what we do, and ensuring that we assess everything so that we are able to make evidence-based decisions about our teaching practices, our student lives, our faculty development, all of these sorts of things. So really, I think about these questions all the time because I'm in an innovative position at an innovative institution. Our education model has been in the works for thousands of years, and you'll see aspects of it that look an awful lot like what Socrates was doing. Fulbright's academic program includes a common first course for all students, common core courses for the first year, residential life with co-curricular activities, a rhetoric course. We use agile sprints and collaborative assignments. We do student-centered learning. Students take ownership of their learning through a self-designed major. We do internships and experiential learning required of all students, and every single student does a capstone project at the end. These common core courses and all of our courses are organized around 6 learning outcomes, which we call core competencies. The core competencies are effective communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creative thinking, formulation or deductive reasoning, and inquiry or inductive reasoning. Rhetorical skills and quantitative reasoning are embedded into each of our classes because we feel these should be taught similarly to content. Our focus, again, is on student-centered and student ownership of learning, which means that our students design their own majors within very broad categories: arts and letters, sciences, and engineering. We teach small classes of about 20 students for 4 weeks at a time. We teach one class, they take one class. And our classes are based around active learning, reflective practices. So these experiences and the very, very deep thinking about learning and what learning is about are why I'm here talking about Education 4.0 with you today. These ideas are very, very different from my first degree, which I started almost 30 years ago. That degree was in classics, so I grant you it was one of the more traditional disciplines. But my experience was so different from that of my students. This is actually a picture of one of the lecture halls that I took classes in at University of British Columbia in 1990. And you'll see that other than replacing chalkboards with PowerPoint slides, not very many things have changed. We had classes for about 90 minutes twice each week, mostly with strangers who sat quietly and listened to the professor, who we addressed as Dr. So-and-so or Professor So-and-so. That person would lecture about something we had read about the night before. We would copy down the content. I think that art taking is a lost art. We would read those notes over and over again so that we could write it back on a paper or recognize it in a multiple choice exam. We got enough of these exams under our belts in order to get a grade. We got enough of these grades under our belts in order to tick off courses and call them a major. Once we checked off enough of those, we had something that we called a degree. I loved it. I loved those lectures. I loved the dark, dim lecture halls that had too many people in them and were always a little bit damp because I'm from the west coast of Canada where it rains all the time. I loved reading over my notes. I loved organizing my notes. I loved studying. I loved everything about it. I learned really well like that. I was also completely a passive participant in the process. I had no agency in that process at all. When we look at data and research on teaching practices, we find that there are high impact teaching practices. George Coe has done this. The Association of American Colleges and Universities has done a lot of research on this. And these are the 10 most impactful teaching practices for our students. First year seminars and experiences, common intellectual experiences, core or foundation programs, learning communities, residential or co-curricular, writing intensive courses, collaborative assignments and projects, undergraduate research, diversity, global learning, service learning or community-based learning, experiential learning or internships, capstone courses, and projects. So Education 4.0 really forces us to reconsider how we teach. And I imagine that although most of us probably had experiences that were quite similar to mine, at least at the undergraduate level, we are being asked to teach in fundamentally different ways. So how do people like us that had those kind of experiences learn how to teach students who are fundamentally different and also need really different skills? And I think the place to start with this question is actually why we should do it. So why does it behoove us as faculty members to teach differently in order to serve our students? Well, here's why. Industry 4.0 is about automating jobs. My job is going to be okay. Your jobs are going to be okay. Other fields are not. McKinsey Global Institute estimates that half of all work activities can be automized. This translates into unemployment for at least 1.1 billion people in fields like manufacturing, accommodation, food service, and retail trade. This is profoundly important for Vietnam because, according to the World Bank, Vietnam's first quarter growth in GDP this year was all driven by manufacturing, agriculture, and expansion in the service sector, particularly retail. These are all the vulnerable industries that are given the projections of Industry 4.0. The places where Vietnam is growing in growth are exactly the places where people are going to lose their jobs because of automation. Furthermore, we're living longer, so there's fewer options out there for our students. We like to work, and we aren't stepping aside to let them in. The why we should teach them differently is because if we don't educate our students differently, we are not serving their needs. And we are contributing to a global problem instead of getting in front of it and leading the solution to it. The sorts of skills that our students will need, according to the World Economic Forum, are complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, judgment and decision making, and negotiation. If we think of these as the learning outcomes we need for Education 4.0, it becomes clear very quickly that we need to do something differently than the way we were taught. So how do we teach these skills to our students? I think that there are actually a few more things that we need to add to these learning outcomes in order to really serve our students entirely. And these are a commitment to rigor and hard working, a willingness to take risks, an ability to navigate complexity of deep disciplinary knowledge, compassionate learners, intellectually curious people, people who are comfortable in ambiguity, people who are community-minded, people who are authentic and growth-minded, hardworking, and resourceful. This comes out of a document that we have at Fulbright called Who Flourishes, which we use to inform our faculty hiring and our student recruitment. These are the sort of people we want to work with, and we believe that these are the sort of people that will succeed in the world going forward. So having a mandate to teach people these kinds of deep-rooted skills in the face of an uncertain future is intimidating. But it isn't really intimidating for us as faculty because we have a lot of experience with this. Some of my teaching practices are very clearly informed by Plato's Socratic dialogues. There is a deep, deep tradition of innovative institutions in the U.S. who are trying these sorts of initiatives and trying to find ways to teach students differently. We also have a lot of information out of learning sciences and psychology about what works and what doesn't work to facilitate learning. And I think it's actually us, the faculty, that are the biggest stumbling block because we don't necessarily want to change and we don't necessarily know how to change. So how are we being asked to change? What is actually being asked of us in Education 4.0? Education 4.0 calls for education that is accessible anytime, anywhere, that is personalized. There's no such thing as one size fits all for a course or an examination. In Duke, there are as few as 2 students admitted into their individualized major. At ASU, Arizona State University, there are 4,000. Teaching these sorts of students requires flexibility where no one class, and more importantly, no single exam can fit all of the students. We need to provide flexible delivery. I love lectures, but this is not a generation that learns from them. They learn from their peers and from mentors. They have so much information at their fingertips, and we really need someone to curate and show them how to negotiate this information. Education 4.0 asks us to provide them with practical applications. Abstract inquiry isn't good enough. And if we're true to our roots in liberal arts and sciences, we also need to be clear that what we are doing is not vocational training. Instead, we need these students to tap into examples and real problems to help them learn. They learn better using modularity, one class at a time, and through projects. These students need to take ownership of their education so that they can follow their interests, and we need to provide a container for them to play within. The stamped-out cafeteria-style majors don't fit anymore. And finally, we need to start evaluating the students on their skills, not examining them on their content knowledge. So if this is what Education 4.0 calls for, these are the ways that we need to teach them. We need to teach them using active learning, project-based learning, give them student ownership of learning, mentor beyond the classrooms and advice about their careers. We need to give them personalized learning, experiences for growth, and nurture their whole selves in authenticity. I want to be really clear. There is no one who disputes the need for content. I want that off the table right away. We can teach them content in a different way. We need to teach them differently to use our content to get a different sort of learning out of them and to better understand their skills. These are some ways that we can teach them differently. So here are some examples of what I mean. Flip your class. Give them the information, the content the night before, and get them to learn it. Get them to grapple with it on their own. And then use the class time to discuss it, to do a project together, to solve a problem together. Assign a case study to help them understand the content. Allow the student to determine her own assignment at the end. Listen to them beyond the words they say when they come to see you. It might look like they're asking for an extension, but they might actually be asking you for help. Give space for differences. Let them do a podcast instead of a paper at the end. Don't restrict them. Don't put things in their way in order to keep them safe. Let them fail. This generation needs to fail so that they can develop resilience. And finally, be a person. Most of the questions that they're asking and most of what they're doing is they're watching us to see what are ways of being authentic, trustworthy people to be respected. So I leave us with some big questions. I believe very strongly in faculty governance and in the sacred nature of being a faculty. I think what we do is a calling, not a job. And I think it's also up to us to lead the way for these movements, which also means that we need to get involved in things that we might not be very involved in. For example, admissions. Who do we start with? How involved are we with our students? What kind of admissions process do we need to bring in the kinds of students who will thrive? GPA and standardized testing are enormously problematic, especially if we're trying to get students who have the emotional maturity to take ownership of their education. How are we assessing this? If we're not doing an examination, then what are we doing? How are we assessing soft skills? Yale NUS and Fulbright University are using a test of emotional intelligence in order to assess our students when they come in and provide workshops and growth opportunities throughout their 4-year degree to see what happens at the end of their degree with their emotional maturity. What do we teach for content? We keep hearing about transdisciplinary problem-based learning. What's the content that we teach, And how do we garner the expertise or get our administrators to give us the money to co-teach? And what else can we teach them? We faculty are not known for our ability to collaborate effectively or for great depths of emotional maturity. If we're not doing our own work with collaboration and emotional intelligence and soft skills, how can we be asked to teach these to students? So I leave you with an offer. Can we work together to develop an action plan? What are the tangible ways that we can work across disciplines, across institutions, and across countries to be the sort of faculty body who lead and serve our students in this global transition? If you're interested in being involved in something that we start here in Ho Chi Minh City, I would love to hear from you. I would like us as faculty to be the ones who change the face of education, so that we can get ahead of Education 4.0 and direct it and lead it in service of our students, instead of being caught behind it and scrambling to keep up with industry. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this today. My email address is mjb@fulbright.edu.vn, and I look very forward to hearing from you.